Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Audio Product Development Alliance. I'm Roger Shively from Shively Acoustics International, and this is the APDA, your gateway to the audio product development. The only organization that's focused exclusively on audio product development, education, providing current and relevant content that can be experienced in person, live online, and on demand. We combine a valuable cross-industry knowledge sharing that the APS can serve as a networking hub for the audio industry, offering access to experts and colleagues for professional development. The APDA is where we come to learn how to build relationships and build better audio products. And we'll be talking about design, measurement, simulation, and today's supply chain. And we also talk about automotive applications, headphones, earphones, wireless technologies, and we even touch on industry standards. Online with us today from the APDA are Steve Willenberg from Play. Hello, Steve.
You doing, Roger?
And we have Dave Lindberg from DB Enterprises and the THD podcast. Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Hi, good morning.
And our media partner, Joel Martins from Audio Express, is not with us today, but supports us all the time. And we'd like to thank those who are helping us produce this today. We are recording this as well, so please check it out on the YouTube channel, like and share. Share it right now with your friends to see what's going on. And briefly, before we get started, we have a few more upcoming events for APDA on this channel. A month from now, in March, on the 25th, we have the Open Control Architecture Alliance, the OCA, here to talk about the AES 70 standard. It basically adds control to, it starts where the AES 67 left off with streaming and adds control elements to it. And we'll be talking about some of the benefits to those who use it. Don't need the whole tool, just need the networking tool to get connectivity going. So, and then on the 8th of April, we have Fraunhofer joining us here for sound personalization technologies, I believe. And I think that today's topic that we're going to be discussing will continue into part two, probably later in May or June, because it's relevant and very interesting as well. So we welcome in today Dan Digre from MISCO, the CEO of MISCO. Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you, Roger?
I'm good. MISCO is one of the last remaining U.S. loudspeaker manufacturers, and MISCO has been a pioneer in manufacturing loudspeakers and audio systems for OEM customers across the globe. Today, we're going to talk about supply chain, import, export, and tariffs. So that hopefully we can try to understand or discuss at the very least the current market volatility and the challenges that are resulting from some of the protectionism that's going on. And hopefully, Dan, you can share a lot of your perspective on the global supply chains and these renewed tariff wars and what it means to make it to be made in America today. And likewise, Dave Lindberg is with us. He works out of Hong Kong and has a genuine firsthand experience there with the supply chain. So, with that, Dave, I'm going to let you get us started here. Just why is Dan here today?
Yeah, well, we're trying to figure out what the heck's going on here. Obviously, everybody knows in the news there's some tariffs being suggested or levied against different countries, and it impacts the audio industry. So we thought Dan was firsthand on building speakers in the US. So what part of the speakers are built and how these tariffs will impact him and how they have been impacting him since his existence, most likely. So I guess let's start with finding out, Dan, just give us a high level on who MISCO is, and then let's dive right into tariffs and what they are.
Sure. Well, MISCO is a Minnesota-based company that designs, tests, measures, manufactures speakers, amplifiers, audio systems. And what's kind of unique about MISCO is that we work across a really, really wide range of industries: aerospace, mass transit, medical equipment, military communications, quick service restaurants, pro audio, home audio, a lot of things. So if there's a speaker out there, probably we've built something like it over our 75 years. Um, we've got kind of different brands. So, for example, like our MISCO OEM brand is kind of our main go-to-market OEM brand, but we also have a couple other brands that are out in the marketplace. ToneSpeak is our premium guitar, bass guitar brand. Bold North Audio is our premium home audio driver brand. And then our Work1 division is the North American representative for Klippel. Does contract loudspeaker measurement, things like that. We've been in business for 75 years, more than 75 years now, and we build speakers both here in St. Paul, Minnesota. We've got a factory that's been in Minnesota for 75 years, and we also build speakers in Asia because in today's global world, you have to have the ability to, support not just your own supply chain, but the supply chain of your OEM customers. So, and because we build products in both the USA and Asia, and ship then, all around the world, we really need to have a fairly diverse, robust supply chain that we can service all of these companies. But now, relative to tariffs, it creates some challenges, right? Because it kind of depends what you're moving to what location and what's being moved from there to what location in terms of how do the tariffs apply.
Mm-hmm.
So, the tariffs that we have that we're dealing with today really started in 2018 is when the first tariffs came on. The tariffs that really impacted the audio industry came on in 2019. And it's really created for a lot of companies very much of a puzzle kind of a thing, trying to make all these pieces work together. And of course, in the midst of all of this has been a lot of uncertainty. We're experiencing a fair amount of uncertainty today, right? Well, every day news pops up about it. So on one hand, we have that uncertainty. On the other hand, we've been in the trenches. A lot of us in the audio industry have been in the trenches on tariffs for 6 years now. So we've already been making adjustments and things like that. So whatever happens next, while it probably will require further adjustments, are things that we've already been thinking about and working on.
Okay. But yeah, just in general, so you're bringing product in, and when you say it's a puzzle, it's depending on whether it's a component or a speaker component or a speaker as a product. You're facing different rates, and trying to manage that puzzle is a bit of the equation you're discussing, right?
Right. Yeah. So first of all, let's just clarify, what is a tariff, right? So a tariff is a tax, right? It's a tax that's levied on the importer of a product, right, by their own government, right? So when the U.S. imposes a tariff, and the language is often misleading because we hear things like, we're going to put a tariff on China, we're going to put a tariff on Europe, on Canada. Well, what you're doing is you're putting a tariff on the companies, the importers that purchase products from those countries, right? So the more correct way would be to say, we're going to put a tariff on our companies that are doing business with these other countries. So it's a tax. And of course it varies, like you said, it varies depending upon what the product is and where the product comes from. And if I could say this, and I'm going to repeat it, if I could say this in caps, I would say the tariff is paid by the importer, not the country of origin of the product, right? Not that there isn't some impact, of course, but the burden of the tariff comes to the importer, and it's paid at the time that the goods land at the port, right? So a lot of our product comes into the Long Beach port. So when it comes in, we get an entry, what's called an entry summary. This is coming from Customs and Border Protection, which is the largest agency inside the Department of Homeland Security. So that's who we actually pay. And I thought it might be instructive, if you're okay, if I just show you all what do one of these entry summaries look like. because this is really kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of like, oh, well, what does stuff cost? How's it paid? Things like that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just bring up an example of one of these. So this is what's called the entry summary. You see at the top, Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So if you look down, I've highlighted a few things. So this is itemized now by product that's brought in. So you bring in a container load of things, and you've got 100 different products. Each one of those has a line on this summary. Okay, so for example, you'll see in the second square here, we've got a thing that says article of China. Okay, so that's saying this is coming out of China. That's the country of origin of the shipment. And then it says microphones, etc., parts other. And then there's a number under that, 85. You see that? That's the HTS code. Interestingly enough, speaker parts, a lot of that stuff comes under this very, very broad HTS code, 8518.90.8100, right?
Yeah.
And, which is one of the problems with tariffs in general, is that they're very, very broad, very blunt, right? So they impact a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Over to the right, you'll see a 25%. That's the amount of tariff that we pay on this particular article. The amount of tariff is 25% of the value of that item. As you see here, it's $37,701. So the tariff we pay on this item is $9,425.25. So then every item that's in the container has a different one. Now, if you look at below this one is another article. It's a slightly different HTS code. It's a similar number, 8518.29.8000. You'll notice that the percentage of this is only 7.5%. Still coming out of China, so 7.5% of 35,000 gives us the $2,600 fee.
So these are fully assembled loudspeakers, and above were just parts.
Exactly. So this is. So for companies like MISCO who want to build speakers in America, this creates what's called a tariff inversion, wherein the parts that we need to bring into the country to actually build products in the United States, products from China, to build speakers in America, actually have a higher percentage of tariff than do a finished speaker, right? So you can see the challenges that creates, or how it impacts your supply chain. So you start saying, well, if that's the case, then would I be better off just building the entire speaker in China, no American labor, no American factory involved, nothing, and bring the whole thing in at a lower rate? So this is why tariffs can create these, I would say, unintentional consequences, but actually very consequential impacts on how you manage your supply chain.
So because it's a blunt instrument, and there's no way to exclude or delineate between the two different codes of the parts somehow, or
right. So yeah, it's a blunt instrument. Now, if our government was going to be more strategic about tariffs, they might say, oh, I think we would like to encourage loudspeaker driver manufacturing in the United States. Let's flip these tariffs around, right? So, when the tariffs first came on in 2018, 2019, there was a process known as exclusions, right? An exclusionary process, whereby we as the importer could say, hey, we think this HTS code should be excluded from the tariffs for these reasons. This is how it impacts us, our customers. This is how it impacts our country, etc. That process didn't work. There were thousands and thousands of requests. A very, very small percentage of those requests got granted. And since then, there has been no opportunity for actually filing exclusion requests. So we're kind of stuck with this.
So in 2018, we had the first instance of this, right? We've been having tariffs all this time. Is that wrong or right? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
But there was exclusion at one point, but there's no longer exclusion?
There was an exclusionary process.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Early in 2019 and 2020, there was an exclusionary process where everybody could make their case for this. And MISCO and several loudspeaker companies, that were still building drivers in the U.S., made requests, and we outlined the issues. And hey, you shouldn't put a tariff on a T-yoke. There's, you can't buy a cold forged T-yoke in America, right? Yeah. There's a lot of parts that go into building a speaker that you really can't. There's nobody to really make them in America.
Yeah, so, and isn't that part of the core problem? Is that you can't buy? I mean, we're required, if you will, to go out and purchase these products offshore because the infrastructure just isn't in place, or it's not profitable enough in the U.S. to bring it back or start up a new business.
Sure, we have to think about this stuff was made here at one time. I've been in this chair at MISCO since the mid 80s, and I've seen a lot. And when I came into the industry, there was a robust suppliers of speaker frames and voice coils and cones and pretty much everything. Even magnets were made in we could buy magnets from Hitachi and TDK. They had factories in America. All of this stuff closed down for economic reasons, right? It no longer became economically competitive to build these low cost things in America, right? And so, rationally, the industry made choices about, let's find other places that we can make these. And China was by far the favorite location because of availability of labor and large supplies of labor and low cost and actually a fair amount of technology and manufacturing, things like that. So it made sense. So now to think that somehow these tariffs make it now economically feasible to let's make all this stuff in America, and it doesn't, right? And if you were to do that, you would be thinking like, what happens if the tariffs go away, right? If I build my business model on tariffs being in place, and then the tariffs go away, and one day they will, I don't know when, but they will. One day they'll go away, and then what? So tariffs don't help a lot of industries. They hurt a lot of industries. They disincentivize a lot of industries from doing things in America, industries that require low cost input components to build their product, and transform that product into a higher value product, right? I mean, like we can buy low cost front plates and things like that, design a really awesome woofer, right? A fabulous state-of-the-art woofer, right? We've substantially transformed those parts into things that have now great value. That's what we should be incentivizing in some way. And if we're going to use tariffs, then okay, let's incentivize it using tariffs. There are other ways to incentivize economic development and technology development than tariffs. But here we are.
That's where you are. Yeah, but you mentioned that you applied for the exclusion. Now, this is perhaps a little suspicionary, but would it be companies like JBL and such and Harman that would lobby to have their speakers manufactured overseas be coming in at the lower rate and then giving them the advantage? So they have the lobby group and the government influence to get those exclusions to maintain their point at 7.5%. You mentioned a few of the speaker companies tried to align to lobby or apply. But is it a game of muscle power of the companies that might influence? I mean, it is always. I know the answer, but what's your comment on that, I guess?
Well, I think you have to go back to when the tariffs were put on, and these tariffs on the audio industry really came out in 2019. They were called Section 301 tariffs, and there was a List 3 and a List 4. And List 3 included they just grabbed a whole bunch of HTS codes. They didn't look at it. Nobody said, choose that one, not that one. It was
Right.
it was, a tweet went out. Here's the list of codes. Boom. You know, and then list 4 had finished loudspeaker products,
Yeah.
things like that. So I don't think anybody had enough time to do that kind of lobbying, and the kind of thinking that was behind choosing all these things. It was clearly not that strategic.
Here's a question. A loudspeaker is a loudspeaker, but it's a transducer, and a microphone is a transducer. So, what is a loudspeaker? Is-
Well,
I mean, if
if
I
you look at
buy
the
a 3-inch speaker from wherever, not from the United States, but from someplace, it's considered 7.5%. But it's a part for me. So how do I differentiate a transducer from a loudspeaker, or is that just terminology that didn't get thought of when they?
it's terminology that really is not supported by the HTS system of classification.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot when you read through those things. I don't know, those classification codes have been on the books for decades.
Oh, okay.
A long time. So
Right.
they don't go to that level of identifying, and you can even see the code that includes parts to build speakers, transducers, drivers, whatever you want to call them, is on that one HTS code.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
everything.
I look up that a lot, and it's always the same code no matter what I'm shipping. So for somebody trying to figure this out, are there website monitoring tools they could go to and like enter what you're trying to bring in? Like whether it's a cabinet, I guess cabinets would be outside of that one code we mentioned already, but where could somebody go to find out what the rates are in real time?
Well, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, USTR. I don't know exactly the website, but they've maintained a list of HTS codes, and the percentage of the tariff.
Okay.
So it's fairly easy to find, and if you Google like Section 301 tariffs list 3. You'll probably get like that list, and you'll probably get everything that's on it, and so you can look, or list 4A, right? 4B, just for the record, never got, that was one of that whatever was on that list got negotiated away between the administration and the Chinese government, and so they never put tariffs on those products.
So
Now,
it's USTR.gov is what it's pretty simple to find USTR. So yeah.
Right. Yep. A good place of information to kind of keep track of what's happening is, if you're an importer, is working with your logistics company.
Right.
These are the people that are really in the trenches day in and day out, and they're following everything, and they get what are called cargo system messaging messages. And I just thought I would share one of those, because this is the one now that just recently came out. Let me bring that up here. There. Okay. So this is the one now that actually is the official executive order.
Mhm.
Are you seeing this cargo systems messaging?
Oh yeah, it's fresh.
Okay.
It's February 1st. Yeah.
It is. This is the one now we've all heard about, the 10% that went on all goods from China. Now there's no list 3, list 4, there's nothing. It's everything. And this is the official notification that went out primarily to brokers, logistics companies, and things like that. Went out February 1st. So there's a couple interesting things. They're now imposing this on imports that are products of China and Hong Kong. Now, in the original Section 301, goods coming out of Hong Kong were not covered under that. It was looked at as different. But what was happening is lots of companies were running products through Hong Kong, calling them, Hong Kong products, and then avoiding the tariff that way. So now they're kind of lumping it all together. Further down in the document, then it shows this, there's now another HTS code that is applied on top of all the HTS codes, which says all of these things are now under this code, and everything under that code has a duty of 10%. And then this is the details now. So the order was given on February 1st. So now anything that leaves China or Hong Kong after February 4th and is received received into a port in the United States after March 7th will be subject to this 10%. Or if something was shipped before February 1st and it's received before March 7th, then the 10% tariff doesn't go on yet.
Now, looking back at the original import document you showed, does that mean that the 25% becomes 10 or it's 25 plus 10?
That's what I was wondering too.
Yeah, it's 25 plus 10. So now it's 35%, and the 7.5% is 17.5%. So what'll happen now is when we get that summary report comes in, for shipments in March, they'll have another line on there and it'll say, okay, your goods are worth $39,000, right? Now we apply 25%, 10%. So we're going to apply 35% of your value of that item, and that's what we're going to pay. Now, one of the things that's really gives you the heartburn as a business is you're paying this, like it comes to the port, boom, you get the notification, you're paying it, right? So you probably paid it before the goods actually get to your warehouse, get to your factory, and certainly before you've sold any of it. So it's like this massive pre-sales tax, right? That you pay upfront. Then you can sell it, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned Section 301. It sounds like it's a massively large section in the U.S. trade. So what all is in there, and is it specific? There's multiple countries, or is it just specific to a certain region? What does Section 301 cover? Is it?
My understanding of Section 301 is it's very specific trade investigation relative to China. Right.
Oh, relative to China. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Do you buy from non-tariff countries?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we still have a very robust supply base in the United States. I mean, we buy a lot of parts. Now it isn't T-yokes and magnets and things like that, but there's lots of other parts that go into speakers that you can still buy in North America. And we have suppliers in Vietnam, we have suppliers in Indonesia, Philippines, so over these 7 years, companies have expanded their supply chains. Now, the word supply chain, you have to think about it, not just your own supply chain, but think about it, the total supply chain that you're a part of, because this also impacts where you build things and what you do. At the beginning I mentioned, we've got customers, all around the world. So for example, some of our customers have moved some of their next level assembly of products to companies like Korea, Mexico, right? So that we can ship a product and other parts go into those countries and get transformed. They become a new HTS code. When we talk about transforming, we're really saying is that HTS code now got transformed into a different HTS code that doesn't have a tariff, right? Or comes from now a country that doesn't have a tariff on that importing goods. So now you're saying, well, how do I best support those factories in Korea, right? Or in Taiwan? Well, you build it. You were building it in the U.S., right? But now everybody's moved their supply chain over there to work with those countries, and so now you're building product in Asia. It could be China, right? And then shipping to Korea, shipping to Taiwan. Then it's transformed and comes into the United States without a tariff as a part of whatever that new assembly is.
Okay. So, but is
Clear
there
as mud.
clear as mud, but there's clearly, if you're buying from an established company, a country that has established or experienced manufacturing versus one that's just trying to fill the void, you're going to have quality issues as well,
right?
And cost issues. So moving your manufacturing location or your sourcing around as because you can't maintain quality sometimes, or you can't maintain price, and so you have to make the decision
Yeah,
whether.
I mean those are costs that are unforeseen,
Yeah,
that the tariffs do bring on. Because you're right, Roger, you do need to have somebody go in and make sure that the factories are building and producing to the quality levels that are needed.
yeah,
As we all know, we've been in this industry for a long time. Anytime you start a new factory, there's going to be a learning curve. It's a very difficult process to make changes, especially from, city to city, let alone country to country. And so, it's a daunting task. And what the unknown is, at the end of the day is, a country where you move a new factory into, is that going to be hit with tariffs? And that's, from a financial perspective, Dan, I'm sure you deal with it just like us at LinkPlay. It's a cash flow topic that needs to be discussed, and you really need to do the planning, and when there's unknowns in that planning phase, it becomes a real problem.
Oh yeah, it's that and some of the countries that are developing supply chains, even countries like Vietnam gets talked about a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of development that needs to happen. Now, if you're a big company, you have the resources to go in there and you can set up a lot of things the way you want it. If you're not a big company, you have to pretty much rely on infrastructure that's there, right? So you have all the costs that you're talking about, which of bringing on a new supplier wherever they are. You have additional risk of bringing in suppliers that are relatively new or in new factories, that are in new areas. And then you have to deal with so how do things work in that country? China became kind of the audio, the audio industry's choice because it's incredibly efficient, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all together, very, very organized, very efficient, so many things that are important. So if you go to different countries, can you rely on the same level of efficiency? Can you rely on the same level of structure? Do you have more disruptions? Lots of those things that will, and of course, the biggest cost of all is, shipments that are defective, shipments that are delayed, those kinds of things. You start running into that chronically, and you've got big trouble. Then you start wondering, okay, is it worth it for 10%? Can we find another way to work around 10% or 17% or something, besides taking on that risk? Because it's a huge risk, and for big companies manage that risk a little bit better. Small companies, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, Vietnam is just. I mean, it was Toyota and Honda, I think, up in northern Vietnam that started. And then Foxconn went in, and so your AirPods are the redundant manufacturing versus Weifang and Hanoi, I believe, are the two spots. But it was driven by those anchors to set up, drag in ST Micro, drag in your metal parts suppliers, and make that little locus of influence that can support the factories in the industry. But you kind of touched on like going to Vietnam and South Korea, but there's this thing about people making sub-assemblies and then maybe bringing it to Mexico or bringing it somewhere else and then into the U.S. And so there's this concept of transformative manufacturing. And I've heard of like percentages. Can you comment or have any knowledge on what you have to do in terms of adjusting the product in Mexico, for example, to make it classify as a different HTS code?
Well, yeah, I mean, you basically have to make it qualify for a different code, right? It isn't the percentage, we've done this much work here. You have to actually transform it into something else. You can't, I mean, you can try it, but the penalties of doing things like that, if you get caught, are very severe. It starts off with, like you're penalized like the entire cost of that shipment, right? If it was a $100,000 shipment, they can penalize you an extra $100,000. And then it gets worse, right? If you're a repeat offender, and once you get on a list, they're going to go in and they're going to take your stuff apart every single time, and that's going to be delays, stuff damage, loss, stuff like that. So you have to be pretty strategic with what you're doing. So you bring in a part, it's a speaker, it's this HTS code, it goes into this assembly, and that's a completely different code, right? And that all happened in, let's say, Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of explains, I mean, not to defend them, but the blunt force approach, because trying to mine into the dirty details of like subdivisions of codes could be a nightmare for our port authorities. All right.
But is there traceability of those things? I mean, how far down do you, I guess there isn't any traceability down to, resins and materials and all the raw materials that go into something. It's too much, I guess, is what you're saying.
Well, at this point, there isn't, right?
Yeah.
Could there be someday? I mean, as
It would be
an
account. It would be a nightmare.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine submitting to to the Customs Border Protection? Here's the list of all the parts in this automobile.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and they spend
all the screws.
next
here's
2
all
months finding all the parts. Yeah.
Well, depends if the Doge guys get a hold of it with their AI kids, I guess.
Okay.
Hey, anything can happen, right?
Well, and a quick question. You were talking about, and we're talking about the possibility of using different locations. And I guess that is way that we're talking about loudspeakers, but there's semiconductor companies out there and computer manufacturers, and Dave is probably familiar with some of those as well. Is there a way to make this supply chain? We talked about making it different, and maybe is that resilient? Does it make it resilient, or is there any way to make it resilient, to make it strong enough to last all the waves and winds that we run into over the years? Is it just going to be changing every time we have a new economic or political atmosphere?
Well, I mean, business is full of risks and full of, is it this, or, do we do this? We do that. The way I look at it is I want to be doing business in a country that's stable. I feel comfortable traveling there. I feel comfortable my people traveling there. I feel comfortable with all of that. But really it comes down to the quality of your vendors, right?
Yeah.
You have to have good vendors. You can have bad vendors in any country in the world. So you've got to find out, do they know what they're doing, or do they have experience, things like that. So it's a lot of, supply chain building 101. Now, if you have then multiple vendors in different countries, and, that are, so you're spreading out the risk a little bit, that's a good thing, right? There's challenges with different vendors coming from different parts of the world, and the extra costs and things like that. But overall, that's what you want to do. Now, you also would like to build things as close to home as you can. At least as close to is where your customers are. So where your customers, build it close to them. Get your own supply chain as close to where you're building it as possible. There's lots of those things haven't changed. But I think it's important that you build your supply chain around good business principles, solid financial quality, all of those kinds of things, so that when the tariffs go away, you've got a supply chain. You go like, man, we that those tariff years were rough, but boy, do we have a great supply chain now. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that still does open up possibilities in America.
I was going to say, because right now you're talking about multiple geographic locations, and I think some of the goal of this protectionist type approach to tariffs is, let's bring it all back home. But is that even fully feasible or even economically correct, or does that cause different problems?
I would comment on that, because I think it's twofold, though. I think it's retaliatory, because to bring a car into China is 100% tariff as a foreign company. So that's not fair. So I think a little bit of is justified in terms of hitting back and saying, hey, come on, China's not an emerging economy anymore. They need to play on an even scale here. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out there.
But to the point of is there more growth in America in because of this? Are
Mm.
we actually going to grow parts manufacturers back? I mean, we used to, I was working in those early days too. Everything came out of either Chicago or Minnesota or somewhere in the Midwest mostly, and sometimes on the East or West Coast, but mostly, close to where the manufacturing is going to be done. And then we moved farther and farther away because of the economics. Is it just not a feasible thing to bring, steel stamping back in or manufacturing back in? Or what are
Well,
we
I
going
think
to
that
take?
it needs to be strategic, and that's from a business perspective. Obviously, everybody has to look at what the bottom line is. You're going to have a lot more value in a finished vehicle or car than you are in a back plate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is, just from personal experience, some of the things that people do where they're trying to get up and running, as we had talked before, it becomes a challenge because of the quality of the product. I've been through it with other companies where we tried to source in the U.S. and it just was a real nightmare. We would have been better off going over to Taiwan for a tool, to be quite honest with you. And there's a learning curve, and you can afford some of it, but at the end of the day, if it's costing you money, real dollars, that becomes a real challenge.
Got it.
Yeah, to Steve's point as well, I think strategic in terms of looking forward, not trying to reinvent the past because the industries evolve and
Right.
the world evolves. So
Yeah.
trying to go back and doing top plates or something in the US, it doesn't make sense. But perhaps there's something with automated manufacturing, like, semiconductors are still made everywhere, like, because you don't need anybody in the factory. Now, that doesn't create jobs. That doesn't answer some of the questions that people raise out of why you bring in tariffs. But where the manufacturing could end up back in the U.S., not necessarily back in the U.S., but start again in the U.S. with a new industry or a new technology.
Yeah, and Dave, you make a good point with some of these fabs, but in terms of job and job growth, somebody has to put up the building, somebody has to put in the infrastructure for these fabs. So there is growth from a job perspective in that section of the business as an ongoing concern. No, I mean maintenance and doing the servicing and that type of thing of the equipment. But again, it's a complex issue and a complex uh, equation to solve. It's always going to continue to evolve. And I think, from a tariff perspective, especially for companies like MISCO, it's a cash flow thing, as we have talked about. And it is a tax that needs to be absorbed. And Dan, I guess the other question I've got is, at what point do you go back to your customers and, talk about price increases?
Well, the tariffs have to be it has to be shared, right? I mean, the way we've approached it is we go to our suppliers and we work with them. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do is put on a price increase, right? So you do as much as you can with your supplier, with yourself, all the things you can do, and then you say, well, okay, now you go to the customer and say, hey, are you willing to share something, or do you have plans in your supply chain that we can adjust our supply chain to help avoid this as well? So, ultimately there's going to be a pass on of something, right? There's, the tariff is, we know it, when we know that the tariff is generally inflationary. We know that it does add cost. It doesn't reduce cost. It's going to add cost somewhere, and somebody's going to end up paying it. And and most of that is going to be on this side, right? Somewhere over here. I just want to say, kind of going back to the Made in America thing, since February 1st, we've gotten many calls from companies who are saying things like, we are being mandated by our management or even by our customers our product that we buy has to be made here, right? Some companies are even going so far as to say it has to be made with American parts. Well, that's a big challenge right now. But if you start looking at, even if you say, well, we don't want any Chinese parts in it, okay, we can do that, right? I mean, we can source the whole speaker or all the parts of the speaker outside of China, bring it in here, and if it's the right type of product, right? So there's some costs involved doing it, but if it's the right type of product, we can build those in America, right? I mean, so I think that there is a strategic opportunity here for the American audio industry. If we start really getting our supply chains right, if we are willing to invest money, last year I invested in 5 robots, collaborative robots, to help us build things here with less labor cost, so that if we can absorb some of the costs through that level of automation. And then maybe there are some opportunities, right? It's not everything, right? It isn't going to be consumer. I don't see a lot of consumer products being made here unless they're really, really high end, somebody's a $5,000-$10,000 home audio speaker, something like that. But I think in specialized products, and especially if something related to defense industry, government purchasing, things like that, there could be an opportunity for companies like MISCO, other companies that are here, to start building things again. And by the way, MISCO we build about 40% of what we sell in Minnesota still. So even though we've had all these challenges, our factory is still very, very busy and has been, throughout the last 7 years. So there's opportunities here. I think everybody just has to be a little smart about how you run your supply chain.
And
All right.
are there any other changes besides tariffs that you see coming along, or is it just is tariff the only thing that's on top of our mind at the moment? I think you're just saying we need to be as open to a resilient supply chain as we possibly can, and if it can come close to home, the better.
Yep.
But then that's probably the.
I think one of the other things that is concerning to me is labor availability. Right? We have huge labor shortages. We all know that. We've had it. It's abated a little bit, but at the same time, that the kinds of people that we want, maybe working in our factories, or maybe being told to go home, I don't know that that's a good thing for our labor source, right? I don't think that's necessarily the right approach. So I'm concerned tariffs are a cost, and labor shortages is a huge cost. Right now, you can mitigate some of that with automation and so forth, but you still got to have, somebody's got to make the automation and service the automation. So I'm concerned that we have enough people. If we're going to, if somebody's going to build a $500 billion factory in Texas, who's going to work there? So we need people.
Yeah, I think Vietnam has the same problem as well, finding skilled people that can run the factory.
It's a coordinated effort, as you all know, between government, universities, educational systems. It's not an easy solution, but it's fascinating.
It's a good question for Dan, because he's hiring people, probably, right? I mean, where are they coming from? Where's your workforce coming from that you have now? Or has it just been someone that's been there for a while and you're not hiring a lot of new workforce? Or what's the state of your workforce, Dan?
Well, it varies depending upon the type of person, So if we're talking engineering level, that's university level people, right? You're talking, for office could be college educated. A lot of them are, right? Some people have liberal arts degrees, and you can easily, a person like that can do a great job in various company departments and companies. A lot of our factory workers are immigrants, right? A lot of them have come. But Minnesota is the home to the largest resettlement of the Hmong people from Laos that started in the 80s. So we have a really, really strong Hmong community in the Twin Cities, and with those people are sort of the core of our factory workforce. People from other Latin American countries have been as well. So you know, you're attracting people from a lot of different areas and a lot of different backgrounds, and that's really important. You know, it's like putting together a team, right? You got to have all these different skill sets and interests and things like that to make a company really successful.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Well, I think that's I think Dave, do you have any other ideas you might want to explore with this part of what we're doing, or do you think
No, I
we
think we've covered it quite
okay,
succinctly, and
good. All right.
yeah.
I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat as well, Dan, in the process, so that's good to know. I mean, but the questions are, you know, pretty large in terms of how we, you know, continue and survive and make things better. But I think this is a good education, at least an understanding, a look behind why it's difficult to do things, and we've just added more tariffs on top of that and more problems on top of that. So, but they will go away, as you say. They do come and they do go. It's just a question of what's. I think Dave, you said it. What's fair, and that's I think the only purpose for a tariff is to make things fair, right? Instead of being
Yeah.
more protective.
I
Yeah.
believe in my research that the U.S. government ran on tariffs only at the very beginning. There were no taxes,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
income taxes.
yeah. I think so. Yeah, before we.
Well, and you will hear the current president talk about what a great revenue source
It was in
tariffs are.
1776.
Yeah, it's a different economy, but that's okay.
Different economy, yeah.
Yeah, today is kind of like on one hand, we're going to do tax breaks and things like that. On the other hand, we're going to hit all these companies with these other taxes, right? So
Yeah.
this is the tax system, of course, you know, picks winners and losers, right?
Right.
Rewards certain
Yeah.
behaviors and penalizes other behaviors. That's kind of how it works.
I think one question that came up just now is where do you go? Who could, or people who want to manufacture, where can they go to get help and support on understanding how to do this? I mean, or advice for that matter. Is there a source that you go to all the time, or is it something that you are constantly looking for that kind of advice? Or is there a place that we can get, you know, like I think Dave, you brought it up too about is there online help, but what is there a good source? Is that the .gov sites that may disappear, or is it where would you go for advice to someone who's trying to sort through this themselves, just like you are?
Well, Minnesota has a really, really great manufacturing environment. We have a lot of medical device manufacturing up here, and so
Yeah.
we have a lot of companies, both private and publicly funded companies that are really help out with that, right? So I would say locally and regionally, you probably have the best hands-on kind of support.
Mhm.
The trade schools are great sources of people, but also of information, technology, things like that.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we've been going. The federal government has a program called SCORE, Service Corps of Retired Executives. So people who are looking, this is for a lot of business people, have an access to free one-on-one counseling through the SBA. That's through the
Right.
SBA has a
Small
SCORE
business.
program.
Mhm.
Yeah, Small
Okay.
Business Association. So that's another great source. But there's really good associations, manufacturing associations. Nationally, there's NAM, National Association of Manufacturers.
Okay. Well, good. That's good advice then. Okay. Thank you, Dan.
The other sources of information too is Consumer Technology Associations.
CTA. Yep.
Obviously this issue and topic is a global topic that's being discussed. So the other comment I would just make is talk with your local legislators. That's the funnel that the discussion that needs to be had, because as we know, as you put it, it is a tax. Whether we admit it or not, it's somebody's got to pay it in that whole process. So it's something that's not going to go away. So we'll have to probably leave it here and discuss and line up another call or another webinar.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
I did try to go all macroeconomic and study the the deflation of the renminbi versus the implementation of the tariffs in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, but I could not correlate it exactly to the dates. But you can see some plummets around January, February 2018 of the renminbi being devalued. But that's a whole other topic we can follow another day.
Yeah, let's try it out. Thanks again, Dan. Appreciate that. That was lovely. It was great information, and always what we expect from you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dave, too. I mean, the perspectives that we're getting here are very valuable to us, and there's a lot of people out there designing and developing and trying to manufacture and figure this puzzle out. So this is
Yeah,
hopefully
and
this
for,
is
for
helpful.
people watching, yeah, we've got a slew because pretty much everybody that contacts me that used to say, "Where can I build this in China, Dave?" They're asking, "Where can I build this outside of China?" is the number one question we get. So,
Okay.
I think we'll have some more guests in the future talking
Oh
about
yeah,
their
yeah.
plans in
That's a
Indonesia and
that's
all over the place.
That's what, and we're trying to make, fill in some of those gaps with the APDA to help educate, just, and inform on things like supply chain as well as the design and product development. So this is what we're here for. Hopefully we can continue that. We plan to. We have a plan to do that as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Dan, where are you headed next? You got anything big planned for your future or?
Well, probably, I head over to Asia a couple times a year.
Okay. All right.
We're, go over there to check on, new factories, old factories, and ask everybody, what's your plan? How you doing? You're going to move something. So
We may have to
that always is in our future.
we may have to have you back and you give us a report on what it's like out there. So, okay. All right. Thank you so much. And once again, I'd like to thank Dan and Dave and Steve and everyone who's been watching online. And just to remind everyone, we do have another one coming up for the APDA online live event here coming up next month on March 25th with the Open Control Architecture Alliance. We're talking about AES-70, also then Fraunhofer in April, talking about sound personalization techniques. Thank you so much. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this online. Follow us and keep in touch. Thanks again for everyone. We do keep this video on the channel, and so you can come back and watch it again and again. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good one. Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.